If we were never part of a group, the concept of leadership would have a very different meaning. Research in psychology indicates, however, that being part of a group is a fundamental part of our human nature. This module will provide an overview of what we know about that and contribute to the goal of being able to apply research from psychology to explain leadership processes, including emergence and effectiveness. Humans appear to have an innate need for interpersonal connection, so much so that it's been compared to the needs for food and drink. We'll talk in a minute about how personality might influence variations in that need, and sometimes being alone can be helpful regardless of our personality. But when we think about people in general, research suggests we're not content in total isolation. The number of groups and individuals belong to, and the variation in what brings the groups together, is one point of evidence for the need to belong. Groups also provide a number of benefits, sometimes described in terms of the social capital of the group. Williams' model of the psychological reaction to ostracism also helps underscore the strength of the need to feel like we're part of a group. When we experience active and intentional exclusion, it can negatively influence our psychological well-being. And we indirectly learned a little bit about personality traits when we learned about trait theories of leadership. This is a good time to follow up on that to make sure we're all thinking about it in the same way. In psychology, personality is described as the characteristic ways people differ from each other. Those differences are often expressed in terms of traits, which are consistent across situations and stable across time. The trait perspective in leadership says those differences relate to whether a person becomes a leader and is effective at leadership. More broadly speaking, it also makes sense to think there might be characteristic differences in the degree to which we seek out groups. The 5-factor model of personality is one of the most frequently used models. The 5 factors are thought of as separate continuums, so personality is described in terms of high or low levels on each of these 5. Some cases, the low ends are given contrasting labels, like introversion being the low end of extroversion, or emotional stability being the low end of neuroticism. If you're familiar with the meaning of the factors, or after you read about them and become familiar, it probably won't be surprising to hear that research suggests extroversion and agreeableness are more strongly associated with group engagement, with higher levels associated with higher engagement. All 5 factors relate to the types of group and individual joins, however. That goes along with research mentioned in the New Psychology of Leadership that found people join groups because they like the people and they like the task or activity. The social identity theory, however, offers a bit of a different perspective on group dynamics. One of the assumptions of social identity theory is that the group membership influences our self-concept. One of the implications being that we may grow to be similar to and trust other members of the group because we interact with them, rather than interacting with them because we have those characteristics. That point, and the others that result from social identity theory, has added significance when considered along self-categorization theory. That theory says we have a tendency to categorize ourselves as well as other people. It goes along with joining groups. Our knowledge of social identity and self-categorization is heavily influenced by research methods known as minimal group studies. In those studies, seemingly irrelevant processes are used to form groups. In some cases, research participants even observe the researcher flipping a coin or counting off to decide who would be in what group. Despite not having any basis to be a group, though, individuals quickly begin behaving like a group. The group to which they belong is called the in-group, and other groups are referred to as the out-group. When groups are ongoing, researchers observed a process referred to as depersonalization, when individual members strongly identify as being part of the group, the stereotyped characteristics of the group, and their personal identity is much less influential in their decisions. Leadership is defined as a process involving a group, and as such, knowledge of why we join groups and what influences related behaviors can add to our understanding. This module is intended to provide an overview of related research and theories with a focus on 4 topics: the need to belong, influence of personality, social identity theory, and self-categorization theory. At this point, you might be thinking, she wrapped it up, but she didn't mention intelligence. Good catch. I wanted to include information about intelligence in this portion of class because it's frequently mentioned in discussions of leadership. Not necessarily, though, the way we think about it in psychology, which can create some misperceptions. Understanding research about intelligence, though, can add to our thinking about leadership. The concept of intelligence seems pretty straightforward at first, but it can get complicated quickly. One reason is because it can be challenging to measure because of the wide range of concepts and topics that can be used or excluded from the measures. In other words, there are extensive questions about the validity of these measures. Understanding about actual levels of intelligence is also limited because of stereotypes of particular groups, which then influence the mental processes in a way that makes the measures less valid. Gardner's theory adds another potential critique by asserting that differences in the way individuals process information means we can be smart in ways other than cognitive ability. His theory says we can be smart in 8 different ways. Emotional intelligence theories have some overlap with Gardner's theory, overemphasizing interpersonal processes rather than cognitive.